Hey everyone, welcome back. Several weeks ago, I received a comment on a video about running a twin cam without cam chain tensioners. I'll admit at first I thought the comment was satirical. When the poster commented again, I realized it wasn't. So I responded with a brief comment to explain why this isn't a good idea. To my surprise, I've received more messages about the exact same subject, people asking if this is legit. In today's video, I'll explain why this isn't a good idea and how over time it could be fatal to your engine. So stick around. Be sure to check out our Teespring store with the new vintage t-shirt designs coming out once a month. I'll post a link in the description below. Also, if you want to support our efforts to make content just like this, next time you need parts, give us a call. We can ship just about anything you need right to your door. I can understand how removing cam chain tensioners altogether seems attractive. It eliminates the issue completely. Sure, you can do this and the engine will run, but at what cost? In fact, you can remove a connecting rod and piston from the engine and it'll still run. That's already been done and they called it the Buell Blast. But the engine was designed to be a single-cylinder engine. The biggest argument in support of not needing tensioners on a Harley chain drive cam revolves around comparing it to the fact that small block Chevys or Fords or similar engines don't use tensioners. You couldn't compare two more different engines, really. In fact, there are many 90-degree engines that don't use tensioners, but also there are modern ones that do. Inline fours, 6 cylinders, belt or chain often have tensioners or some sort of idler pulley, and it's all dependent on the engine design. But for now, let's illustrate the difference between a Chevy V8 cam or Ford V8 cam and cams from a twin cam Harley. First, let's start with how the cam and crank is supported in the engine assembly. There's a bearing right next to where the chain sprockets mount on the cam and crank in a Chevy or Ford. Like here. This is the bearing surface where your timing chain would then mount directly at the end of the cam. This aspect makes it virtually impossible for runout of either shaft to be a factor. Basically, that alone ensures there is constant tension on the chain. With the Harley, the pinion shaft extends 6 inches out from the crank bearing surface, and as we all know, we'll have some runout. Sure, the cam support plate provides some rigidity, but any shock load to that shaft will result in accelerated wear of the cam plate on the pinion shaft. So that leads us to explaining shock load. In a valve train, you have opposing forces that try to prevent the camshaft from rotating while opening a valve. Valve springs can have 160 pounds or more of installed seat pressure. Then consider a rocker arm that has a 1.6 ratio, which provides a mechanical advantage, increasing the pressure through the pushrod to the lifter and then finally onto the cam. Now the rocker arm acts like a lever, and the opposing force on the cam is far greater than the valve spring pressure. But it's far more pressure than just the pressure with the valve on the seat. An open valve spring at full lift can have as much as 350 pounds or more of pressure just on the spring. Apply the mechanical advantage through the rocker, then to the cam, and I'm sure you can understand how, again, those forces are amplified even greater. Now, let's take a look at the cam lobes on this Ford V8 cam and compare to the twin cam. Now, on the Ford V8 cam, you have 16 lobes along a single shaft. This means that the opposing force of a lifter on some lobes simultaneously has forces counteracting it throughout the entire 360-degree rotation. Without getting too technical, you have 16 forces evenly distributed in 2 directions across 360 degrees of rotation on an engine with a firing order that is symmetrical and at 90 degrees. But on the Harley cam, you only have 2 cam lobes, which are unevenly distributed because of a single crank pin on a 45-degree engine. Now ask yourself, what does all that mean? Basically, as the lifter, under extreme pressure, comes over the top of the cam lobe, it will experience a snapping motion because there are no other lobes to counteract that force. That snapping force, as it comes over center, will create a harmonic vibration over time and accelerate wear on the cam plate, and the cam bearings. As much as when it comes over center, this could actually become an impact point on the cam lobe itself and start creating divots, wearing away the hardness layer and that sort of thing on the cam. Now, the chain tensioner acts as a cushion to absorb that shock load, take up some of the slack, and prolong the life of all of those components. Now, let's expand on shock load and discuss other components of the bike to compare. You have a primary chain tensioner basically for the same reason. You also have a compensator. The job of a compensator is to absorb engine pulses. Remember, it's a 45-degree single crank pin engine with a bit of an offset crank rotation. The reason you have a primary chain tensioner is threefold. One, it allows slack in the chain to again soften engine pulses. Also, you have rotating masses that aren't perfectly concentric. There's some amount of run out on the clutch basket, the transmission main shaft, and the sprocket shaft of the crank. There needs to be some slack in the chain, otherwise constant tension will create a harmonic vibration and destroy main bearings in the engine and transmission. Also, again, it helps to soften that shock load. The other big factor is temperature change. A primary chain adjustment will vary as much as 1/4 of an inch of slack based on whether that chain is hot or cold. Temperature makes a huge difference. Sure, belt drive primaries don't use tensioners, and that's because the load is shared among many teeth over a wider area, and it's a belt, which will absorb shock load in itself. So why don't you need a tensioner if running chain final drive? Mainly because temperature will not vary like a primary or in the cam chest. But run a drive chain too loose and it'll destroy chain sprockets, even breaking teeth if you hammer down on it hard enough. Run it too tight and you'll destroy wheel bearings, the chain, and the transmission main bearings. The last comparison I'll make has to do with valve timing. Any of you that have been around V8 engines enough will agree that if your cam chain stretches on a small block, Chevy, Ford, or Dodge, or any other similar engine, it will create an erratic idle, a loss of power, the engine won't run as smooth, and if you put a vacuum gauge on it, you would note that the engine cannot maintain steady manifold pressure at idle. The same thing will happen inside your Harley. The more slack in the cam chain, the more inaccurate your valve timing will be, and these same problems can occur. Now, over time, because of the shock load I mentioned, the chain will begin to stretch even more. It will then wear those bearings prematurely and be detrimental to the life and performance of the engine. Remember, at 3,000 RPM, your cams rotate 1,500 times per minute. That's 1,500 times the lifters come over center and slam the cam down in the opposite direction. Cam bearing needles are very small. Only one roller can completely destroy an engine if they happen to come apart. Now, you can observe how this would affect cam timing for yourself. If you run an engine with the tensioners installed and use a timing light, you can see how closely the cam and crank sprockets stay in time. Then remove the tensioner and repeat. You'll see how the timing marks are inconsistent and they jump around all over the place. Now, I know it's not cheap, but if you want to get rid of your tensioners, pick up the phone and call us. We'll help you choose the right cam and convert it to gear drive. If that's not in the budget, install new spring-loaded tensioners. If your crank has too much run out, we can still convert yours to a hydraulic tensioner system, which is far more reliable than the spring-loaded tensioners. Now, if you want to remove them entirely, sure, your bike will run. People have survived jumping out of airplanes without their parachute opening, but that doesn't mean I'm going to jump without having one strapped to my back. In the coming days, we'll be continuing on the twin cam build series for Dorothy and Daryl, then the M8 build for Stephen and Gerald, and then the Dyna build for Johan, and a whole lot more, including a restoration of a very rare 1968 Plymouth GTX 440. Hope this clears up some of the questions about how and whether or not you should remove your cam chain tensioners. As always, everyone, thank you for your support. Take care of yourselves and each other. Have a good one.